Good morning, everybody. I'm Tracy Gardner, the Global Marketing Director at VLink Inc., and your host today for our tech webinar series. We certainly appreciate you being here for our discussion on turning AI disruption into advantage for your tech stack, how to optimize tech in the evolving AI and DeepSeek era. DeepSeek is certainly shaking up the AI industry. The recent launch of the new open source model has disrupted the AI sector by emerging as a formidable challenger to existing popular AI models. Now, at the center of this shift, how can tech leaders position their organizations for success? We're going to talk about that because we've got a great guest for this webinar. I'm so excited. Frank Neugebauer, a pioneering AI expert who is on the ground floor of using AI models like Google Gemini and ChatGPT. Frank has expertise in AI and has collaborated with Google Cloud on advanced AI solutions. With over 35 years in the tech business, Frank does know his stuff. He also knows how to play guitars. You can see behind him, he's got some guitars there. Maybe he'll talk about that at the end of the webinar. But he's currently the director of GenAI at one of the nation's top insurance companies, Cincinnati Insurance, leveraging his extensive expertise to drive innovation and development. We're so glad to have you, Frank, and we'll get to you in just a few seconds, but I want to do a couple of housekeeping things. This is a half-hour webinar. We got a lot of ground to cover, so stick around. We're going to talk about DeepSeek, AI industry's thrilling roller coaster, emerging trends shaping AI development and deployment, and the competitive edge, what companies must do to stay ahead of the AI curve. And remember, if you have any questions at all, you can put them in the chat starting right now. We'd love to answer them. We'll get to them as they come in. We love those live questions. So Frank, we're so glad you're here. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
You're welcome. Frank, let's start with the recent news surrounding AI. We've had a lot of it. President Trump, talked about his initiatives. And then, of course, a couple of days later, we hear about DeepSeek, China's AI startup. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on all this AI news?
What the administration is doing is a continuation of what we have been seeing, which is kind of trying to figure out which way is up when it comes to AI. And there are different philosophies and visions of that. And I don't know if I consider one greater than or less than another. I do believe that as it relates to DeepSeek, what we have to be mindful of isn't so much whether or not DeepSeek's model is better. If you look at the hyperscalers, the Googles, the Amazons, even the Anthropics of the world, the models are relatively similar to each other. As a user, as a consumer of those models, the difference, a 2% difference in accuracy means nothing to me. So I don't follow the bouncing ball very, very closely when it comes to things like that. But what I do follow very closely in the case of DeepSeek and companies like that is whether or not they're going to be sued for infringement of some copyright, some kind of use of other people's data. OpenAI has indicated that they used their data to train their model. That kind of thing can end up in litigation that ultimately could influence us or affect us. So in a world where one model may be questionable and another model may not be, I'm going to go with the one that's not. The other thing that I think very carefully, the other thing I think carefully about in terms of the regulation is ultimately the federal regulations tend to trickle. So they tend to trickle at the state level. In my industry, insurance, we're regulated 50 different ways. The state departments of insurance do their own thing, but there is certainly a philosophical shift that we could see from one administration to the other. We pay attention to those macro level kinds of movements. And then certainly at the micro level, when we govern AI, we try to make sure that we're staying ahead of the principles, and we have to monitor them on a regular basis. The fact of the matter is, nobody really knows for sure how humans are going to react to AI and how AI is going to react to humans, and in what ways these models can show bias. So another thing that we're really keen on, and we've spent a lot of energy focusing on, is making sure we don't do things with models that can do bad things. I'll give you an example. We're going to be doing some work with looking at resumes using AI, because we could find 5 things that are very important in resumes immediately. However, those 5 things are written 5 billion different ways by people, and that is what causes us grief. So we took that use case off the table. It's just too soon for it. It's not like we don't want to do it. We're researching, but we have to be very mindful of the kinds of use cases that we do. Now, if I was building a model, I might look at the world completely differently. I may be looking at the regulations and what's happening with the administration very, very differently. But as a consumer of those models, I have the luxury of being able to say, you know what, I'm going to stay clear of the danger zone and focus my energy in learning and becoming an expert in the things that I know are pretty stable.
And, we could talk about regulation and governance forever, but, that's a whole different webinar, for sure, because it could really consume us. But let's talk about some ways generative AI is evolving right now. What would you say to that?
So what we see a lot of is how retrieval augmented generation is being enhanced, so models don't have such a big liability when it comes to their memory. The models stop learning at the point when they're trained. So, for example, if you go to the underlying model for ChatGPT, not ChatGPT itself, but the underlying model from OpenAI, and you were to ask it what the weather is like in East Lansing right now, it would not know. If you go to ChatGPT and you ask the same question, it does know, but the model doesn't know. It actually goes to the World Wide Web, goes to weather.com or something like that, and pulls up weather.com and gives you the weather in East Lansing. So that retrieval augmentation is something that the model builders are trying to embed more and more and more inside of the models themselves. And think of it less like it's a model, but more like code that lives on top of the model, just like ChatGPT is an interface into the underlying large language model. We're seeing more and more of that. And because hallucination is this thing that is the Achilles heel of generative AI, and everybody knows it. It's not a secret. And people are afraid to do things with generative AI, not realizing there are ways to minimize hallucination. And never forget that if I ask a human being a question, I'm going to get different answers every time. Humans do the same thing, right? And we have much higher standards for AI than we do for each other. And I don't know if that's good or bad. It just is what it is, right? So we tend to, so that's one way in which the model builders are trying to get better at it, trying to reduce hallucination, trying to have better retrieval augmented generation. The other thing we're seeing more at scale, because it's shifting from a philosophy or even like it felt to me like a bit of not realness, which is agentic AI. Think of it like orchestration for language models. You see these examples like, I want to fly to Bermuda, and I just tell the chat that, and it goes and uses APIs to go find all the ways I can fly to Bermuda, and it will book my tickets for me. It'll do everything for me using AI and large language models. So it's combining these two ideas together. I think at first I thought it was a bunch of hype, to be very transparent about it. I followed it. And then I saw the Google white paper, and not that Google deserves credit beyond anybody else, but Google tends not to write white papers that are just for marketing's sake. So it got my attention. We spent a lot of time focusing on it. I think it's real. I don't think it's what people say it is. I don't think it's magic. I don't think it's going to, be the cure for cancer or whatever, like people talk about. But I think that there's real benefit to it. Having built some agentic solutions at my company, I will tell you that it's an explicit way of doing something. It's not implicit like the hype might indicate, but quite useful. And that's another real hyper trend. And then the last thing I would say is, there's a lot of talk about like a DeepSeek. Remember, DeepSeek didn't do anything special with the language model. There's absolutely nothing special about it. In fact, it performs a little bit worse than ChatGPT. So that's not the benefit of DeepSeek. DeepSeek's magic was they built the model for a fraction of the cost. Think about how much money. To me, I think about not only the money, but more importantly, I think about all of the resources, electricity, water for cooling, for air conditioning. Like, there are so many of these things. It really is problematic to me, like philosophically, that why do I have 50 different large language models? They're all basically the same thing. I mean, they're not exactly the same thing, but why do I have to have that many servers, that many GPUs, that much cooling, that much air conditioning, all of that stuff redundantly? Like, it just feels very redundant to me. So if we can make that less expensive, we can make that maybe more efficient at some point in time, that would be great. But at this moment in history, there's just a whole bunch of them, and there's a whole bunch of DeepSeek took older hardware, and that's why they're able to do it so cheaply. And in a way, they recycled old hardware. So I give them props for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful we have people like you who can help us sort this all out, because it is confusing, from a consumer standpoint. I mean, you've been on the ground floor working with this stuff since the beginning. And so a lot of people haven't. They're just coming into it. I know we have some companies here represented in the webinar, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Frank and I will take the questions. Frank would be happy to answer anything. What can companies do, Frank, to stay ahead of the curve on all of this?
Well, first and foremost, inside of your four walls, find out what it is that you need from a business perspective. Like anything else. And when I was at Google when ChatGPT hit the market. You can imagine what it must have been like for the people who created the underlying architecture to be behind the eight ball for the first time, maybe in their entire history. Imagine what that felt like for Google. And I was there, and what I kept telling people was, hammers don't build houses. And I'll say that to the day I die. Like, generative AI is a hammer. It's a beautiful hammer, maybe the most amazing hammer in the history of technology, but it's still just a hammer. We are the carpenters. And we build the houses as companies. We're the consumers of what they do. They've given us a great tool, but it's just a tool. If I think that the tool is the solution, which is what some of those companies would have you believe, then I've already compromised my own ability to solution, my own ability to innovate, my own ability to decide my future as a company. That's first and foremost, is don't give away the keys to the kingdom. Number two is pay very close attention to those regulations as they relate to your industry. If I'm in financial services, non-insurance, I'm carefully paying attention to what's happening in the SEC. If I'm an international company, I'm paying very close attention to what's happening in the European Union with their AI law. So they're not just giving you philosophy, they're giving us law. United States with the departments of insurance, some states are being more aggressive than others, because those regulations are going to create boundaries within which we have to operate. And what I can do theoretically with AI and especially with generative AI, and what I am allowed to do are going to be two different things potentially. So between what it is that I need from a business and what it is that I can do from the regulatory perspective, those help to govern what happens. That's number one. Number two, pay attention, because this stuff is changing, not daily, but boy, it's close to daily. And yeah, it seems like it. It's true. So experiment, get to know what you don't know. I think that, when I joined Cincinnati Insurance 14 months ago, I wanted us to be in a place now where we knew the answers to the questions that we had 14 months ago. And more importantly, we had insight into what we wish we would know a year from now. Because it's not enough. It's not enough to go and learn. You have to learn intentionally. And our purpose was, how do we take chances? Well, and I worked my way back from there. If I want to take chances with generative AI, what do I need to know? Well, I need to know what the regulators will let me do. I need to know how people are going to react to the AI and how AI is going to react to the people. I need to understand the extent of the hallucination. So I worked my way backwards from my ultimate objective. And that's where we are today. We were able to pick projects that were inside of our four walls, that didn't touch our customers, didn't touch our agents, and gave us the opportunity to learn those lessons, all foundational. Yes, we added value, but doing like the cool thing that I read about in the Wall Street Journal was not my intention. This year, maybe that's the thing I want to do. Maybe next year, that's the thing I want to do. But last year was making sure that we didn't end up on the cover of the Wall Street Journal for having compromised somebody's rights or their privacy or things like that. So we took a very, very seasoned, rational is probably the wrong word, but conservative approach, because we wanted to learn. We knew there were things that we didn't know, and we identified the unknown unknowns as best we could, or at least the known unknowns, and we worked through it. And it surfaced a lot of very interesting lessons. In particular, like I was saying earlier, people have extraordinarily high expectations of this iteration of AI. I have never seen end user expectations this high before. They expect perfection, and they expect the models to be able to understand what they mean without telling it what they mean. So they would write prompts. They would ask questions like, "Tell me about the thing and how I do it with the stuff." And like, you can't ask a human that. A human would not know what to do with that. And they were like, "Well, how come it doesn't know? It's magic, isn't it?" And
it doesn't know what I'm thinking. What's inside my brain?
True. And I was surprised at like how much credit people gave the models, much more credit than anything I've ever seen before. And I'll tell you, me personally, I'm an eternal cynic. I love technology, I love AI, but I'm skeptical of it, and I remain that way because I think it's important to have that mindset.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Well, Frank, we recently did a poll on LinkedIn, and I want to show the results. If Taryn can bring up the slide there, I want to just get your thoughts on this and see if anything surprises you about this. So we asked people on LinkedIn, what's your biggest challenge in adapting to the evolving AI landscape? And to me, not surprisingly, like we talked about, the changing daily, hourly thing, keeping up with AI advancements was 56%. Of course, integrating with the tech stack, sometimes that can be difficult. We at VLink could help with that. Ensuring security compliance was 0%. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't. I'm stunned. I'm stunned.
I'm stunned too.
For me, that was the very first thing I cared about last year. We spent a full 4 months working on security and compliance before we even went there. And the main thing there is all of my data, which some of it's going to be intensely sensitive, is going into a cloud provider. Now we have both on-prem and in cloud language models, but the fact of the matter is the really sophisticated stuff goes out into the cloud. And so security for us was paramount. It's just such sensitive information. If a high profile person who's famous, for example, we do insure some famous people, if their medical record was to be made public somehow, or worse yet, found its way into a language model because some vendor was keeping the data or giving it to OpenAI or something, boy, can you imagine the implications there? So that stuns me seriously.
It
doesn't surprise me that keeping up with what's happening is so high. I would say that it's important to get a handle on a generation of technology. So what I mean by that is, at a moment in time, learn everything that you can about that moment in time, and then forget about the bouncing ball for a little while. Go and learn with what you know, and then incrementally go and follow the bouncing ball after you've learned these basic core lessons. Because otherwise, you'll end up following the bouncing ball for the end of time, and you won't get anything done. I can't. It's just, sometimes you got to stop trying to be happy and just be happy. Sometimes you got to stop trying to figure out what AI is doing and just do stuff with AI. And that's my advice to people. That's what we did.
And Frank, we do have a question. Somebody is asking a question. I'll let you know what it is right now. It says, what is a current way you are personally, professionally using AI that has really surprised you?
Personally, professionally. Okay, so you mean that professionally? Personally, I use it to write songs, and so that doesn't really surprise me though.
There you go.
One of the ways that I did not expect the models to work is the ability to do analytical reporting without coding. I did not expect that to work. So when I was at Google, I did an experiment where I had email messages with just widgets, and I literally called them widgets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I gave it. I converted that email into JSON, which is a technical format, and I did math on the number of widgets by in my example giving it a widget price, a price per widget, multiplying times the number of widgets, and that gave me my subtotal. I created a subtotal and a grand total, and then I changed the number of widgets, and it did the math for me. I didn't expect it to be able to infer such kind of analytical ideas. I took that idea and my team built something far more extravagant, where we took voice, converted it to text, and we began to count and understand sentiment in some of the calls that we get. And more than that, we were able to tell the moment when the sentiment changed, and I'm going to overstate this, but why the sentiment changed. So we had to ask very specific prompts to get to that answer. But the idea was, it knew, like, people went from positive to negative because our people used words like bad or unfortunate or mistake. It went from bad to good when people used words like good, great, congratulations, things like. So we were able to kind of do that. I did not expect the models to be able to make such inferences beyond the generative space.
Yeah. What role do you think regulations play in all the evolution that we've been talking about with all these players on the scene?
A couple of things. Number one, as I said earlier, they're going to draw boundaries around the things that we are allowed to do versus the things that theoretically we can do. A good example of that, I always refer to this example. I should not be looking at people's resumes when it comes to this generative AI. Why? Because people write differently depending on where they come from, depending on their exposure, depending on their parents sometimes, especially in the case of younger people. That can be really, really problematic for regulators. And I think regulators are going to do that. It will hurt people's ability to get a job. In our industry, any selection, if I'm saying this is a good risk, whether it be in banking or in insurance or, this idea of fraud. By the way, I never use the word fraud when it comes to AI. If there are anomalies, then maybe that's a better way to look at it. Fraud is a conclusion. Anomaly is a piece of data. And I tend to focus on the data, let the humans make the conclusions when it comes to something so risky. Regulators will limit our ability to understand, to do things like that. They already are, by the way. And so we don't really get to do anything we want to in insurance, and we shouldn't do anything we want to. We should be regulated.
Absolutely.
because we affect people's livelihoods, and insurance affects people's ability to buy houses, to start businesses, to own cars. All of these life events that happen and are enabled in part because of insurance. It should be managed. And I think it's going to play an important role in that. At a much more macro level, it's really hard to say. And I think that alone is enough to answer the question. How? I don't know. And I think that's important, because that means, am I going to bet my entire business on this one solution that I build with generative AI? Absolutely not. I'm going to have a backup to my backup. I'm going to have another way of doing it. I say inside of our four walls, we have a server inside of our four walls that can serve small language models. Why did I do that? Well, one really bad event by Microsoft or Google or Amazon, and we're all watching black and white television again. If that happens, I need to not lose all the investment that we made in generative AI. True. And maybe it won't be as good with smaller language models, but the fact of the matter is it'll still work and we can still go forward.
Why do you think the US is so far behind in the regulation? Like you mentioned, Europe is, there are definite regulations there. We're not as regulated. Is it just we're behind a little bit, or
I don't know if it's ahead or behind. The regulatory environment, it's subjective, isn't it? We can say one is good or one is bad. I look at it like they're different. The European Union, they created heavily consumer-friendly laws, and they codified them. They're not suggestions, they're laws. You break them, you pay money. In the United States, we tend to take a more, I really don't have a conclusion, because my view and your view, and the people who are listening to this, it could be very, very different. Philosophically, I believe in a balanced approach between allowing businesses to innovate and protecting consumers. And I don't know what side of that balance we fall on. I would argue probably that balance is shifting all the time. Sometimes it's very consumer friendly, sometimes it's very business friendly. I think in an ideal world, it's both. We allow businesses to innovate, but we don't do so at the expense of the individual. And That is where I think that's why it takes us a little bit longer, because we take that more, we try to balance it a little bit better. I maybe that's a bit of a optimistic view of it. I don't really know. I don't get involved in below that level. I just look at, here's the regulation, here's what I need to do with it, and here's how I need to comply with it. I really don't see us as being behind. I see us as being maybe more bureaucratic about it, but I don't think that that's a bad thing overall.
No, not a bad thing at all. And just a reminder, we have about 5 minutes left. So anybody wants to ask Frank some questions, we want to allow some time at the end here. I just have one more question. So put them in the chat or in the question and answer box, and we'll get to those. Frank, anything changing in the non-generative AI world?
Before I do that, there is one more question, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading this correctly. So the question here is, I mentioned, somebody said I used music in AI. Somebody asked about ethical concerns like intellectual property rights, which I think is a really good one. So for example, the New York Times has sued OpenAI, saying your model learned by reading articles from the New York Times. That's true. I really can't argue that point. But here's the question. How much did it learn from reading the New York Times? How would you fractionally decide that? I think that's incredibly challenging. So intellectual property rights are going to really be the frontier of where this goes. It's one of the reasons why we stay very clear of certain things. Like when we hear, I'm not going to pick on anybody because I wasn't there. I don't really know what the facts are, but based on what I read, some of the things that Meta did, they knew that they were using some copyrighted material that maybe they shouldn't have used, but maybe they're also thinking about fair use. There is a fair use doctrine that exists, and does this fall into that? I don't know. It's an argument. It's a hard thing to say. I would say that when it comes to intellectual property, it's going to be fascinating to see how it works. It poses serious ethical dilemma. Another dilemma related to that is if we have bias in data because we're reading all the books over time, and all of the people who wrote those books were, they had proclivities that were generally male dominated. Generally, if you look at books from the 50s, they were not exactly what we would consider politically correct today. who's going to change that? How do you change that? Who makes those rules? That is such an incredibly complex dilemma. To me, it's going to feed into both the intellectual property rights and what the definition of truth can be. And I think it's really fascinating to me.
And, I feel like we're all playing in the sandbox together. We're learning. Some castles are going to be built faster and they're going to be better, and some castles are not. But I feel like it's this big, huge sandbox that we're playing in.
It's a great metaphor.
But back to the non-generative AI world. Anything changing there?
What's fascinating to me is, with so much emphasis put on generative AI, the traditional machine learning is beginning to almost be passé. That's unfortunate, because traditional machine learning is still incredibly powerful. Let's not forget that all of generative AI is based upon traditional machine learning techniques. There's no new technique that was created other than, in fact, there were no new techniques. It was just the way in which they were used in this transformer architecture at scale, and an incredible scale. I think there's still incredible competitive advantage in the non-generative AI world of machine learning. And even in AI, if I think about rules engines and smart systems, if I combine the two, it becomes very formidable. Think about using generative AI with traditional machine learning to come up with solutions that are well beyond. I can have predictions that have more objective measures. They're more transparent in those objective measures, unless I'm using really large neural networks. But like traditional non-neural network based machine learning is deterministic, meaning that if I give it the same input, I will always, every single time without exception, get the same output. There are times and places where that is everything, where I don't want any hallucination ever, no matter what. And I want to make sure that I can do that.
Consistent. Yeah.
100% consistent. Like you think about, like in the medical field, when it comes to things like your diagnosis, do I want to have like it tell me that something is wrong when it's not? I want to be able to have more consistency and transparency. I need to be able to explain to regulators what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what the outcomes are, and why. And with a neural network, especially large deep learning neural networks, you can't explain why. It's like saying, I can go from my house to the grocery store 5 million different ways. Why did you go this way that time? I have no idea. I don't know. I just felt like
that's good for your brain, by the way. Take different paths. It's good for your brain.
Yeah, and that's why the neural networks are so smart. I don't know. Maybe that's why it works so well now. But so I look at traditional machine learning as now a greater competitive advantage, because so many people are paying attention to things that are not traditional machine learning.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the time we have for now. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if they pop up, we'll certainly take them. Thanks so much for you've been a fantastic panelist, Frank. Great discussion. We certainly appreciate your valuable time, and everyone else for joining us for our tech webinar series. If you know someone who might enjoy the webinar, we'll send out the on-demand link tomorrow. If you want more information from Frank or myself, you can contact us. Frank's contact information will be up in a second, and everything will be on the screen. If you need an AI IT consultant or implementation partner for your AI initiatives, VLink is here to help. Please contact us or visit our website at www.vlinkinfo.com. And Frank, it's certainly been a pleasure. Maybe we'll have to do it again, because you've been more than interesting. I've really enjoyed our chat, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Tracy. Check's in the mail. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thanks,
Have
everyone.
a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.